Pieces are working here. Okay, so I just want to make sure those of you who are attending live that you can see the slides that are up. I've once given a whole presentation and all of my slides were not up. So hopefully um, you can see the slides. If you can't, just chat, put a note in the chat for me. Okay, so we're gonna get started. This is so exciting. I'm excited to share some of this really useful content with you. And if you have questions and you're attending live, you can just place them into the Q&A for me. That would be great. Okay, so in this webinar, I'm going to show you how you can help your child to study. By the end of this time together today, in 30 minutes or so, you're going to gain some new tools and ideas that you can enact right away to help your child. And I'm so excited just to share all of this with you. So if you want to email me afterwards or email Stephanie afterwards and get these PDFs. I have 2 PDFs to share with you that you can print out and send to your child. So the first one is this sort of how to study guide that I'm going to talk through today. And the other one is a math 3-column note sheet that I'm also going to show you, and we can give them to you over PDFs. And if you're listening to this on the recording, you can do the same thing. Just email us and we'll be happy to send you over the PDF. Okay, so I'm going to be with you for 30 minutes. We're just going to go through why most kids fail to study. There are typical approaches they're going to take, and we're going to teach you some strategies and tools that work and have a Q&A. Briefly, for those of you who do not know who I am a learning specialist. I've spent years teaching in the classroom setting. My focus in my career has been within special education, math education, general curriculum development. I've taught in college. I've done a lot of different types of things. And recently I'm working in my company that I founded where you're finding us right now, which is Evolved Education Company. We support students to learn well. That's our mission. And we provide services to families directly in the form of tutoring, parent education consulting, which this webinar series is really aimed to provide some insight into what we do there, and also school placement advisement. So I'm going to get into today's agenda. So we're going to talk again about why most kids fail to study, typical approaches that kids are taking, strategies and tools that I would like to teach you to replace some of those failed attempts with, some resources. We'll get some time for Q&A, how to work with us, and then of course you can have your bonus. Okay, so also one of my other learning specialists is going to join us in about 5 minutes as well. Her name is Becky Reback, and so we'll be chatting with you together as well. So I'm going to get right into the failing to study. So often this is the line that we give our kids. We say, I'm just going to give you a little exercise to do to make my point, okay? So if you could just imagine yourself doing this, or actually do this, okay? And just grab a sheet of paper, write down 3 sentences on that sheet of paper. So maybe you could tell me what you did this morning, right? I went to get my kids up for school. I got them ready. They're now on the computer or they're out the door. Whatever you want to write down, you're going to write down 3 sentences. And now I, the teacher, am going to say to you, okay, study these sentences. Okay, so study those sentences. So either you're going to imagine doing this or you're going to actually do it. So my question to you is, what did you just do? When I directed you to say, I said, now study those sentences. What did you actually do? And if you want to throw it in the chat, go ahead and imagine, tell me more of what you actually did to study those sentences. If anybody has any ideas on that, I'd love to hear from you. So maybe you read them over. Maybe you tried to memorize them. Maybe you put them into smaller pieces so that you could remember the order. Maybe you pictured yourself going through your morning and that helped you remember what you were doing, right? So herein lies the biggest mistake we tell our kids in this whole venture is we say, go study. Okay, so the word study means about 10 or 15 different things. It is a process, it's involved, it has a personalization to it, and it also has an expectation of a context that we need to establish, and we usually don't. So we just sort of tell kids like, study this information tonight, or, make sure you know it for the test. And these very large statements that really have no particular meaning or 5,000 meanings within them confuse our kids and really set them up for an issue here. So instead, I want to go through some of the failure points first, just to really be clear on what we're doing with our kids. So you can catch yourself when you do these things as parents. So if you're catching yourself at home, and home is often where we have to study, right? Our teachers send our kids home, and now the parents get to study with our kids. And so we don't really know what we're doing. And so then it becomes a challenge, right, for our child. So this is what this is supposed to do, is to help you with some of these understandings, okay? So really, studying means any number of these things, really. It means that you have to learn the information. Learning incorporates lots of different things. So you have to understand it. Sometimes you have to analyze it. Sometimes you have to evaluate it. Sometimes you have to connect it to something. Sometimes you have to explain your thinking, right? So we have to learn the information. We have to put it in some kind of context, meaning there's going to be some experience that we're going to have in school in which we have to show what we know. So that could be an essay, it could be a multiple choice test, it could be fill in the blanks, all these different kinds of ways of sharing what we know. We have to memorize information. That's tricky. Sometimes our brains work differently. So, sometimes when I asked you to remember those sentences, maybe you put them into a picture in your mind. Maybe you had to write them out over and over and over again. Maybe you had to make the words into less words so you could actually remember them. So memorizing is really a part of studying, but it's really individualized as to how that actually works. Sometimes we have to practice. So in math, this is a big deal to me, in that we tell our kids, go study for your math test. And often what kids do is they just practice a bunch of problems. And to me, that's the biggest mistake we can do with our kids in terms of having them study. And I'm not saying we shouldn't practice problems, but I'm saying without strategy, without some kind of roadmap for this studying, it's completely ineffective. And often kids get very frustrated because they've spent hours studying for something that hasn't translated to success. Okay. And then we have organization that has to happen, and compartmentalization. So we'll get into a lot of this, but I think you are understanding some of this because you probably live it. But here are some common failures, right? We have most kids spend about 90% of their time just gathering all of the information they have to learn. So I've spent time in session. I've come into many different tutoring sessions over the years of my career, and I've seen this mistake happening right before my eyes, where literally the day before the test, for an entire hour of our session, we are spending time going to find all of the notes, rereading the reading, trying to figure out what we have to know for this test. And that is the time then that the child says, that's the hour I've spent studying. But if we really think about it, that's really just gathering information. It's not studying, really. It's not sort of or it's not the whole process of studying. Okay. Failure number 2, most kids study everything they need to know. So they're sort of, either they're doing it because there's a fear factor that if they don't practice everything, then they're not going to know everything on the test, or they're just literally practicing everything because that's what they think they have to do when they study. So they've got to do every single note card, all the note cards for all of the outline that they have, or they have all of the math that they have to learn. So this is a big problem because it can exhaust kids. It really teaches them that everything is of equal value and importance in terms of spending their time within the studying process, which it's not. And it also isn't effective. So then they're exhausted. They've had a bad experience. They go into the test, they don't do well, and the whole thing becomes unpleasant, right? Most kids spend a lot of time studying in a manner that does not fit their brains because we have not done the work ahead of time to figure out, how does your brain work best? If your brain works really well in a visual sense, then you should be studying in a visual sense. If your brain works really well in an auditory processing verbal sense, then you should be studying that way. If you need to move things or be moving, then you should be moving when you're studying. Okay. Most kids spend time studying with no regard to how they'll be tested, meaning they don't really ask questions to their teachers about what's the format of this test? How am I going to be assessed? Because these things matter. We need to know how we need to share what we know, because that's going to guide our studying process. Most kids study the night before the test. This is really true. And I get it, because it does have there's a little bit of adrenaline that happens when that is happening. And truly, it helps kids get through much of what they need to do with studying, which, if it's really unpleasant, if studying really stinks, having that adrenaline and that dopamine hit right before you have to go in for the test is super helpful. And kids are just kids, and they're responding to their bodies and what the feedback is telling them. So they're gonna probably wait till the last minute. And most kids never evaluate the effectiveness of their study strategy. So oftentimes we really do them a disservice by not going back and saying, how did that work out? Did that work for us? Or like, should we change something in that? Should we do this differently? What do you think? Right? We never really do that. We just sort of continue moving forward, right? We get back the test. Oh, you got a 60%. Gosh, darn, what happened? What did you get wrong? Let's go into that. Let's redo those problems, right? That's a lot of what we do. We actually we correct the test. And when we do that, we're missing the point totally. It really, really is so irritating to me when we have to correct a test, because I'm like, wait a second, what about the process that led to this particular test grade, right? What about all of this? And this is what we're ignoring. But I get it, because again, I think systemically what we're dealing with is that you parents are in charge of the studying, and the school is in charge of the content and the test and the grade. And so, when we're sort of operating in these camps like this, it can be very difficult to see the whole picture of what's going on. And I get it. But we can start this conversation, and we can start to have this conversation with our kids, and then we can bring it into the teachers too, who are listening, and they want to maybe bring it back to the parents. That's great. But everyone should be talking, because this is a really important process that happens, right? And it's all about really executive functioning. So typical approaches, I'll just spend a couple seconds here, but I see this a lot with my kids. They say, okay, I have a test tomorrow. I'm going to go make a Quizlet. And I'm like, okay, wait a second. We have like 5 things to do before that. So Quizlet's great. I love Quizlet. It's cards. If you don't know as a parent, it's like these cards. They can put them on their phone. They can study. They can memorize. It's fantastic, but it's not studying. It's like a part of studying. But most of the time, kids just say to me, I'm going to go make a Quizlet. Or they make note cards, right? Or they just procrastinate and they wait till the last minute and they don't really know what they're doing. So these are things I see all the time. Okay, so let's get to the meat of this, because now you're like, okay, Mary, I totally get all the problems I'm having. I get it. We're having all the problems. So what do we do? What do we do that's different, right? Okay, well, funny you should ask, because I'm going to give, I love your question. Whoever just put that in there, I'm going to get to that. Okay, so create your roadmap. Okay, here's the first thing we need to do. We need to spend a little time away from studying. So if you want to sit down on a Saturday morning, Sunday morning with your kid, and just say, I have this little tape that I'll show you a part of. You don't have to show them the whole thing of me talking, but you could show them this part, and you could I'll actually say hi to the kids. I'll say, hi guys, how's it going? So here's what we want to do. We want to create a roadmap. We want to learn, how does your brain learn best? These are typical categories, but they're not all, okay? But sometimes kids learn by visual, sometimes they learn by hearing, sometimes they learn by doing or moving or writing, handwriting things out. Sometimes they need to make a map to show how things come together on a page. Sometimes they need a little music to it. They need a little jam so that they could remember something. So experiment a little bit, write all those ideas down, and then ask your kid which works best. And if nobody knows, it's okay. Just start with something. Start with handwriting out what you need to learn, and let's see if that helps. Let's see if a picture or something visual will help. Okay. Next question, what's the teacher's testing style? So is the test going to be an essay? Is it going to be a couple of problems? What can I learn from past tests? What can I do as I learn to minimize the study time? Meaning, like, is there something I can do along the way to learn this information, or am I going to just do it all in the last minute? Maybe each weekend we could sit down and just kind of take stock of what you just did last week and talk about it and organize it a little bit and categorize it, which I'll get to in a second. And then lastly, like, what am I telling myself about this study stuff? Am I saying this should be fun? Because if it's fun, then I'll do it. No, right? So we have to evaluate some of our thoughts that we're telling ourselves about why we do what we do, right? We are doing this because it's our responsibility as a student. This is what, will allow my teacher to know what I've learned. I also have to do the work to learn. So this is my work to learn the information. It's not just my teacher's responsibility to share the information with me. I have to do the work to learn it, right? So examining your thoughts is really helpful. We're going to replace the word study with all of this process. And you might want to work on your own kids' like actual study process and write it down for them more specifically. The more vague you are with this, the less success you're going to have. So being really clear about what it is that you do. If you need to do it this way, you can do it this way. Narrate it. Take out what you've learned this week in history is one way of saying it. But there's all kinds of little mini directions in there. How do we know what we've learned in history this week? Do we have to go on to the Canva posting? Do we have to look into each homework assignment and pull those up? Do we have to look at notes that we've taken during the week? So there's all these little mini tasks that are in some of these more larger macro directions that we tend to give kids, these very macro directions, right? Becky, I see you're here. How are you? If you want to pitch in, you could. I'm just going through these slides.
I know. Okay. You're good.
All right. Just quickly, I'm going to go through these next ones just so we have some more time just to delve into some of the key strategies. So how will you be tested? So some teachers are really straightforward with how they test, meaning they give like a study guide and then this is what you're going to be tested on. And some teachers are like, no, that's not the way I work. I'm going to give you concepts to learn and then you're going to have to apply them on the test. So knowing your teacher's testing style is part of your job of being a student, is to try to figure out what is this assessment going to be like, and what is this teacher going to be really looking for. And if they don't know, they should be meeting with the teacher to find out a little bit more information, which is a whole nother webinar. How have you been tested? So what's going on? What's the feedback that you've gotten in the past? And how can we apply that going forward so that you can learn best? This is my favorite strategy, and I made it up. I think it's pretty like universal in terms of the concept, but I use it all the time with my kids, and I call it the stoplight strategy. And kids have changed the colors on me, which I love them doing. I think it's very, very fine to do that. But essentially, the whole point is when you get content that you have to learn, a really great place to start is to apply the stoplight strategy. Red is, I don't know this stuff. I need it to be retaught to me. Yellow is, I need to practice. I need to memorize. I need to work with it. I understand it, but like, I don't think I could really use it in the testing situation yet. I think I have to work with it a little bit more. It's understood, but I need to do a little more work with it as a student. And green is, I know this. I don't need to spend any more time on it. Now, remember, I talked a little bit about being effective with studying. This strategy alone can change the kids' lives in terms of studying, because what they start to do is they start to understand that in class, when they're actually in class, they're learning so much information and they don't need to study all of that information that they know. So they don't need to spend all that time right before the test learning the stuff they already know. It also makes them more accountable and actionable during class time, because they don't have to wait until study time to learn the information. They can do it right then. So this is a great strategy to use. I really love it. Memorizing is a key thing. We do need to memorize as a student. Sometimes we need to put some strategies around memorization. So we need to understand what's the expectation of this memorization, meaning, is it supposed to become a habit? Is it supposed to become something I'm always doing? I know in math, we often have to show our reasoning and our steps. If that's the expectation, then we always need to do it. It takes 66 days to become, to move something into a habit. So we constantly have to practice and put it in our line of sight if we really want to memorize something.
Mary, I just wanted to say one thing about memorization that I think is a really important thing to point out is that memorization is really difficult for a lot of kids, especially kids that have, challenged or weak executive function. So I think that the first thing where you said context, I think is really key. And then not only just the context of what you need to know, but also connecting it to something that's really like close and familiar to the kid. So it might actually be a connection. I find when I do a memorization with my students, the connection is actually something that's like in their life, not necessarily a connection that is about the content that they're talking about, right? So they need to kind of feel it really personally in order to be able to memorize it. So I think if you're having kids that are having trouble memorizing, try to make some type of connection. And I usually try to make it really silly. So that way, when it comes up on the test and they see that word that we kind of make really silly, they laugh and remember what it is.
I love that strategy. I mean, I've done also where we have to learn vocabulary, and I'll make the children like actually write sentences.
Yeah.
And they always make sentences that are really personal or funny or just like, within their social dynamics of friends or something. And I think that's great because, again, they own it as much. And again, if you as a parent are helping, try to stay out of the actual work of this as much as you can, because you need your child to own that connection or the work that they're doing.
So true.
Yeah.
Like having them come up with the example, I think is like the biggest thing.
100%. Yeah. And if they don't feel comfortable, it may be because as parents, sometimes we do input ourselves a lot. And so the relationship could be where they're sort of waiting for us to deliver, right? And so sometimes it's just the work of noticing when that's happening and just little by little encouraging some of that independence and release of that dynamic, right? So just pay attention. If you notice that there's challenges within this, that's okay. Just start writing them down. And then, of course, that's why we're here, is to help you just address some of this. But it's really important to put them in the driver's seat. And practicing is really key. But again, do that in tandem with that stoplight strategy, right? We don't want to just practice all the math. We want to practice the math that really we need to. And this leads me to that 3-column sheet. And I realized I forgot to put it on the slides, but essentially it's a simple concept of putting the problem on the leftmost side, putting the solution in the middle, and then on the right side, this is really where the golden stuff happens. You write down notes to yourself, things that you personally, that's what Becky was saying, like that you personally want to remember about that problem or process. So if I'm studying finding X in a problem and I keep forgetting that I have to undo the subtraction and addition first, not the multiplication, because it's like opposite PEMDAS. If I'm losing you, it's just this algebra stuff. And it's like, I just keep forgetting that. I'm like, oh gosh, I just keep forgetting that I have to do that. That's okay. Just write a note to yourself in that rightmost column, like note to Mary, don't forget, do the addition and subtraction first. You keep messing this part up. And that way it becomes a really personal reminder. And then when you see that problem on the test, what's queued up to you is this studying process that you just did. Oh, Mary, don't forget, undo the multiplication and division first.
And Mary, I actually often tell my students to take that one step farther. And if there's something they know they're going to forget on the test, the second they get their test, I have them write it down on the top of the paper.
So smart.
Right?
Yeah.
Because usually like before a kid goes into a test, they're looking at their notes really frantically. And so that's the last thing they're going to look at, right? Because that's what they're really worried about forgetting. So I say, like, repeat that to yourself. The second you get the test, write that down on top, because when that comes up on the test, you're going to be really happy to go back and see what you knew you were going to forget.
Totally. Totally. All right. I'm going to breeze through some of these other ones here that we have and then get to the questions. So calendaring, like Becky said, it can be very overwhelming for a lot of our kids to memorize. So doing this over time. But again, if we just say study, 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 kids are going to just not do anything. So we have to really be very specific about our directions on the study calendar. And I would actually post the calendar out of their computer onto something that they can actually see and check off after they've done it. And then Becky also mentioned this whole point, like make it fun. Like it doesn't have to be horrible. So try and elicit their ideas around this, right? So it's okay for it to be fun. A couple of resources. I mentioned Quizlet, which I do like. I just don't like kids making Quizlets just for everything. I think it's a misuse, as I already mentioned. The Pomodoro method is fantastic. You can look it up. It's a basically 20-minute cycle where you work for 20 minutes and then you take a break and then you work for another 20 minutes. It's very effective. And then this Go Conquer site has mind maps because I'm a very visual learner. So I like to have everything like written out and diagrammed for me. So this is just an online format for some of that. They have other features too. Okay. So as I get to a question, I'm just going to leave this up because if you do have further questions, we do consultations with families on an hourly basis where we can talk with you about what's going on with your child around studying. And we can also provide executive functioning tutoring with your child one-to-one. So this is how you can set those kinds of things up. I'm going to go to the question because there's a really good question and then we'll close it up. Can you address what to do about multitasking? If kids like to watch, listen to YouTube, social media, message with friends, play video games while doing homework. Great. So I think it's a great thing to just pay attention to what your child is doing that with and ask some further questions of them to understand a little bit more about why they're doing what they're doing, just because we can assume a lot as parents. And Becky can jump in here and talk about a little bit of that, the work that she does within this. But, I've learned as a parent that I assume a whole heck of a lot. So sometimes I assume that they're, talking with friends because they don't want to do their work, or they're on this because they don't want to do their work, or whatever it might be. And in actuality, maybe they're having trouble with something that needs to be addressed. And by just opening up a conversation like, hey, I noticed like when you're doing your math homework, you're also watching YouTube. Like, tell me more about why, like, what's going on there? How is that helpful? Like, I want to understand. So start there and then, try to really understand. Then we can get to a solution if there's an issue there. Becky, you have something else to say there?
You said it beautifully. Yeah. I mean, I think it's just like getting the kid to, I think the biggest thing is getting the kid to buy into the fact that maybe it's not actually helpful to be watching YouTube or scrolling through Instagram when you're trying to do your homework or study. So if you're opening the door through that really neutral, like, I noticed you're having difficulty doing X, what's up kind of thing. If you're opening it to that neutral line of communication, usually they'll kind of realize and say, okay, let's come up with a plan together. And maybe the Pomodoro method is the great plan that you come up with. So you can have 20 minutes to work and then 10 minutes or whatever, 5 minutes to go on YouTube. So you can have that kind of mental break kind of thing. But I think the buy-in from the kid is the key part. Because if you just say, I'm taking away YouTube and your phone and all that, it's just going to create a fight.
Yeah, agree. And ultimately, like so I think we can all agree that when we're watching YouTube or on social media, those are certainly tasks that are going to bring our brains away from active studying and learning, right? Listening to some music, dialoguing with a friend truly around work could actually help a child to learn. So it's sort of, again, it's worth a deeper dive into what's going on. And sometimes kids are doing these things because what they're being asked to do is confusing and unclear and unsuccessful. So they're going to what's successful. So to me, it's just a really great action for them to take, because it illuminates an opportunity for us to have a conversation and actually teach them something that they may need to know to do their jobs well and to feel good about doing their jobs, because that's really what it's all about, right? So I hope this today was helpful. Again, we're going to be having a bunch of these webinars this month on different parts of executive functioning. And again, if you would like to chat with us further, we would love to hear from you. If you have any particular questions that you would like to have us address, just write to us and let us know. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And we'll see you hopefully on Thursday. Have a good one, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.